So yeah, let's get into the counterplans. I'll be taking questions at the end. But yeah, this is the same counterplan lecture that I gave last year, but I modified it a little bit to be more visually appealing. This is what we're going to be going over today. I know that y'all like graphs because I like graphs. I know teachers like graphs because I like agendas and knowing how to follow. On the agenda is learning the 5 concepts to understanding counterplans. 1, parts of the counterplan. 2, how to compete with asks. 3, counterplan negative strategy. 4, types of counterplans. And 5, ask responses to counterplan. Now, a little bit more detailed. So this is the overview. I try to be very concise about how I organize things. So if there's anything that y'all need to follow or reference, if you're jumping in, doing whatever, this is going to be recorded and uploaded to YouTube. So if there's a part that you would like to rewind to, that you'd like for me to repeat or go over, what would be very helpful for the Q&A section is when you do have a question, a comment, whatever it is, if you can reference these slides, 1, 2, 3 through 19, these are the order of the PowerPoint presentation. If you would like to follow on your own or even skip ahead, you can click on the presentation that is in that folder. I'm using the exact same thing. So actually you might even see me like go through each one. You'll also see the script that I wrote in the notes because that's what I will be reading off of. So regardless of whether or not you're able to make this lecture, you missed part of it, or the tech mishap is just like, I don't really want to pay attention. That's fine. You could look at this counterplan lecture and then learn on your own because that's really what I'm going to be going off of. So really overview. Overview are these things. So this is just a more detailed, this part of the slide is a more detailed version of this basic concept, okay? So this for organization, we're going over all of these. And first part is parts of the CP. So this will be consistent throughout. So I really do appreciate when you make your comments in the chat to make sure that you are numbering which slide you're referring to so I could pull it up during the Q&A and kind of like talk. So there's a visual graph or presentation in the lecture, as well as me like kind of talking. So I hopefully this will be a little bit more engaging and interactive. Let's get started. First part, let's go over the parts of a counterplan. Parts of a counterplan. I've been learning more about teaching tools. So if you take notes, if you're like a student who's taking notes, I would suggest labeling these and then taking notes per section, right? So each slide is a section that would be helpful for you to organize in your own way, your own thoughts, but I organize it this way. So if you have a clarifying question about counterplan is like a big topic, right? It's helpful if you're talking about like, okay, well, I'm confused about counterplan. I'm like, okay, cool, what part? Oh, slide number 4, right? So number 4 parts of a counterplan, then I will like pull up parts, this number, and then next one, right? So that's what I'll be doing for the Q&A just as an intro, just so we are all kind of on the same page about how to engage with this lecture a little bit more productive. Cool. Parts of the counterplan. In a very basic sense, this is 3 parts. 1 is the text, meaning a 1 sentence to 1 paragraph summary of the recommended policy action. Next is the solvency. The counterplan solves some or all of the app's advantages. And 3, net benefits. The counterplan avoids a dissad that is caused by enacting the plan. If you don't get some of these, that's totally fine. Jargon lingo will explain that all. Just try to follow along as best you can. Kind of like if you didn't hear something when you're flowing, you don't just stop flowing the entire speech, right? You just pick off from where you do hear it. So I expect that this is how we're also going to be following this lecture and really just all lectures, because that is growth mindset and we be learning every day, because I know I do. Next, so now we're in second part. See, parts, we already second part. We are, I don't know percentages, 20%. Yes, we are 20% finished. Now we are going to go over how counterplans compete with the AF. Counterplans are negative strategies that neutralize the 1AC and focus the debate on the next net benefit. Sometimes the 1AC is right about the problem that they identify, and the 1AC can be very effective at claiming the moral high ground on an issue that is gross to contest. So the CP allows you to compete in these situations and refocus the debate on an issue of your choice. So right now, it just seems like I'm reading off of the slides because I wrote these and they are supposed to be very readable and explainable. So that is what I'm doing right now. what I would say is that I know that this is the JV group. If there is a vocab term, meaning there is a debate term like a net benefit is debate jargon. It's a term that you're not supposed to know. If you don't know, that's fine, right? It's very helpful to me if you're like, what page, what slide is this? This is slide 6. If you're like, I need help with slide 6, right? Please explain slide 6 net benefit. I don't know. Cool, I will explain that. This is my style of teaching. I will baby talk because I have a puppy who is, his name's Archie. My sister and I call it Archie talk. When complex things are very complex to explain, Archie talk, toddler talk is very good because it simplifies complex concepts to explain, simplifies it, and makes it easier to comprehend, right? So if y'all have heard of Bunny the Talking Dog on TikTok, where they have like the buttons I'm pressing, they're pressing it, and Bunny is human. It's like, Bunny, you want what? Bunny, go outside. That is how I'm talking to my puppy Archie. So Archie talk, the concept of Archie talk I'm going to do right now is simplifying these concepts because debate is very complicated, right? And we only have limited time. I only have like a 40-minute lecture, right? Or really just until 2 o'clock to kind of go over these things. So I'm not gonna be able to go over everything, so hopefully the basics will cover it and then we can get more into details in the Q&A. But if you are unsure about a term or just you're like, I'm not gonna pay attention because I don't know what net benefit is, that is not very helpful for you if that's how you learn, right? It's okay to be asking questions. This is open space. I learn more how to teach if you are asking me questions because I know how to clarify things. So thank you for your help and asking questions. Yeah, next part. Third part of the counterplan is the counterplan nag strategy. So 2 main goals of this is to neutralize and turn the affirmative and win external offense. So an effective neg strategy has 2 main goals. One is to neutralize or turn the aff advantages, which is a defensive case argument, meaning there's no solvency, there's no impact, there's no alternative causes, right? And this is also what a counterplan does. Second, right, you need to win massive external offense, right? These 2 things are argumentative goals, right? This is what you're supposed to do in a debate round. So if you think of debate like a game as more like a football play or any kind of type of strategic play, basketball, football, poker, chess, whatever it is, neutralize, if you think of the term neutralize or external offense, those definitions can be applied in other sports that is not debate, because I consider debate a sport, an academic sport, right? So if you're able to understand sports or know statistics, I want you to try to understand debate in the way of neutralizing or like winning any type of sport, because if you're able to see it in that context, I think it'll be a little bit more simple to understand the strategic value of some of these arguments. So winning massive external offense disadvantages or critiques that have net benefits to your CP or KOs. It's okay if you don't know what critiques or net benefits to your CP or KOs. If you do not know what this means, please reference the slide, which is slide number 8, and be like, question, slide number 8, can you talk about net benefits and KOs, IDK? I don't know what you mean. And I'll be like, all right, let's go over it. Next slide, we're almost done, folks. 4th type of CP, types of CP. This is going to be the longer section than the previous 2. So let's go over the types of counterplans. There are types of counterplans for water. This is the exact same format as last year. All I did was change the water topic. So the reason why I'm saying this is because if you get the foundational understanding of a counterplan, right, you can understand the water topic, any other topic, and apply that same method and structure and teaching and understanding to any other type of topic, right? You will fit the topic into counterplan. You do not understand counterplans from the lens or from the view of any type of topic, right? So when you do things well, or like you learn the foundational part, everything gets easier. So that's why I spend a lot of time on, or at least my focus, if y'all have been in my lab, I have taught you, you've worked with me, my focus really is on educating and basic understanding, because it's really difficult to unlearn things that we misunderstand or maybe mislearn or not as efficient way of learning. So I'm really open to other methods to remember things, because Traditional school ways of teaching is not very helpful or conducive to all types of learning, and I learn in very different ways. So any insight is very helpful to me. Anyway, back to the counterplans. We have really three main types: reform counterplans, abolition counterplans, and agent counterplans. I want to clarify that these are how I personally categorize these: reform counterplan, abolition counterplans, agent counterplans, right? When you are in the debate world, right, they're not going to be like, they may not use the same terms as I do. This is how I'm presenting counterplans, right? Debaters, instructors will have different perspectives or maybe choose different words that I'm using. I'm deliberately choosing certain words or how to present this information for non-debate people to understand and be able to teach, right? So if you are like, well, it's not very relevant to debate, try to put yourself in the seat of someone who does not know anything about debate and try to learn from that understanding, not as a debater. Okay, so I found that more helpful to me when I'm trying to teach basics of debate. Teach it like you're 5. Teach it like archery talk, right? Baby talk, toddler talk. These are very complicated things. It helps me, so hopefully it'll help someone else. Okay, first is, also going over, reform and abolition are very short sections. Agent counterplan has 3 sections, so if you're making notes, whatever, just know that agent counterplans will be the bulk of this lecture. Oops. Let's go. Cool. Reform counterplan, strategy against teams that completely abolish some of the aspect of the water topic that is run exclusively by the USFG. One topic that I know that I heard from the topic lecture was the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. This kind of app, this is really vague and unspecific. So if you have specific questions about the EPA specific apps, in the Q&A, I can answer that, but probably better during lab time. These concepts are better to clarify with individual labs, but if you want to understand like the argumentative integrity or structure of it, we can go over that in Q&A. But if you're asking about specific files or cards, I will not be going over that during Q&A because I do think that is more helpful in smaller group settings like with lab. Anyway, so if you are if you have an app that's like has something with the EPA related, right? That's just an example of reform. So there could be different plan texts that explain or use EPA in their plan text. It's like that EPA should do this, right? Any example of EPA that is the affirmative I'm referring to in this example. When you run across that app, right? You're going to be running the reform CP, the reform counterplan, right? With the politics dissad, right? Meaning that reform counterplan, if you're trying to get a CP and a DA and put it together, you would run the reform counterplan, which is like you could do Environmental Protection Agency counterplan with a politics dissad, right? So the reason why I have this little graph is so it's just an example of how I categorize an affirmative, which is EPA, and the plan text of an EPA counterplan is to reform or try to improve on something, right? This will make more sense when I get to the agent counterplan. So next slide. Strategies against teams that try to reform some of the aspect of water topic that is run exclusively by the USFG. Actually, I will go back to the reform counterplan because I forgot that I did write some notes that I think is helpful to go over. Reform counterplans. These will be popular strategies against teams that try to completely abolish some aspect of the water topic or the USFG that is run exclusively by the USFG. This includes apps that abolish public and private institutions such as the EPA for like public government or private companies like Amazon who are hired by the government to provide public services. That might be a little bit unclear. So if you would like me to go back to this slide, please let me know in the chat and then we can kind of like go over this whole concept again. But moving on to the abolition CP. So strategies against teams that try to reform some aspect of the water topic that is run exclusively by the USFG. That I think I read the abolition part. JK, I'm sorry about that. Reform, yes. Abolition, okay. Yes, abolition counterplan. So in context of high school and college debate, abolition counterplan sounds like we should abolish this part of the government, or we should abolish all of the USFG, right? It is not affirming the government. The USFG is not saying the USFG should do this, pass this plan, blah, 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 right? That is not an abolition counterplan, right? An abolition counterplan would be the negative team saying that, oh, the AF wants to pass this plan by the USFG. Actually, we should abolish that portion that the AF is trying to pass, right? Because it's not even effective or functional. Instead of improving it and funding it and making more money, right, by reforming it, why don't we just abolish it? Because we don't need it, right? That is essentially what an abolition counterplan is versus a reform. So back to like reform is like, hey, we can fix it. Yay, let's fix the government. Let's fix some part. We can do it. Yay. That's the negative strategy. It's like, you know what? We found a better way to fix that thing that the app claims to fix, but we fix it better. Abolition is like, oh, the app is trying to fix this thing. Abolition is like, no, we don't need to fix that. We need to get rid of that thing, right? So that's an abolition counterplan. So if you are able to hear negative strategies, watch varsity debates, and hear a counterplan, if you're able to categorize those counterplans, whatever you hear, as a reform counterplan, an abolition counterplan, and that will I get to my next point, the agent counterplan, you're able to find strategies and argumentative strategies on how to offensively attack it as the affirmative or use it strategically as the negative, right? So for me, these are important concepts to understand and learn, because that's how I categorize all debate arguments on high school, college, whatever level. Is that an agent counterplan? Is that an abolition counterplan? Is that a reform counterplan? When I decide what I think that counterplan is, right? When I say I just mean like, if you're a debater, whoever in that round, it's up to you to decide what you think that counterplan that the other team is running is, right? You determine yourself, you and your team member, or you and your coach, how to strategize against that. This slide, these 3 slides is how you choose what strategy to employ, right? So this is the debate game strategy part. Next to agent counterplans, let me get some water. Agent counterplans, types of counterplans. So these are strategies against plans that try to reform at the state or local level. So when you say agent counterplan, agent is like a body, a being, a person, an institution. Agent is just like agent, person, institution, corporation, whoever, right? So if you think of agent and you think states, a state is a type of agent, right? Supreme Court is a type of agent. Congress is a type of agent, right? So that's why I categorize that as agent counterplan, because for the EPA Act, like depending on what type of agent it is, the 3 types, which is the 3 types of like counterplans, right? They try to, what this counterplan aims to do is to say that, hey, the app is a good idea, right? But the app is using the USFG, meaning the whole federal government. We don't have any specification out of the neg about how the federal government will actually be enforcing these, right? So agent is a question of enforcement. Agent is a question of enforcement mechanisms. I'll explain what more of that means. So let's go over the 50 states, Supreme Court, and Congress. So the 50 states counterplan. The US Constitution dedicates the vast majority of water power to the 50 states and localities. Whatever leverage the federal government has pales in comparison to the states. The counterplan is usually run alongside the federalism facade or the politics facade. Next, Supreme Court counterplan. If the affirmative specifies Congress as its actor, the negative might have the Supreme Court interpret part of the Constitution such as it basically requires Congress to implement the plan at some point in the future. Since Supreme Court justices are insulated from political pressure, this counterplan is usually run alongside the politics disad. For example, is water a human right in the eyes of the court? If so, how will that impact water companies and people who live in areas with little to no water systems, right? So those are like questions that you would pose or ponder or say or whatever, think about when you are running or arguing against the Supreme Court counterplan. Next, the Congress counterplan. If the plan specifies the Supreme Court and its actor, the negative might decide to read Congress counterplan. Congress would essentially pass a law requiring the substance of the plan's ruling. This counterplan is usually read alongside a court legitimacy dissent, saying that the plan would be perceived as too political, hurting the legitimacy of the Supreme Court, and ultimately the rule of land and the U.S. and abroad. Right? It's kind of like Congress is like, oh, you deal with it, or just like let them deal with it. Right? So if you think of Congress and you think about how really broken our government is and how inefficient it is, if you think of how ineffective it is, Congress is like this explanation of like, it's too political, we cannot. That is like more of a social aspect and like perception, right? It's saying that, hey, these avenues, because of the three branches of government, think of agent counterplans as the three branches of government, okay? If we're bringing this back to high school, we're bringing this back to like US history, or, AP Gov, whatever, right? Agent counterplans are the three branches of government. If you're able to identify in around which branch of government that the other team or you want to argue or employ, right? If they are running the 50 states, then you know that there are better alternatives because the opponent already picked one of those. So you already have some evidence and arguments to go against that. So that's why I kind of like this visual and referring to the slides, because it really does help me kind of point out the functionalities and the visual representation of an oral argument or of a written argument, because debate is very wordy, very just vocal, very not colorful and pretty, right? So next. Moving on to theoretical issues, right? I have a lot of novices in JV. They're like, oh no, what do I do as a neg? I don't know. Okay, next to-do list. This is very simple. All the things that, these are like theoretical issues, meaning debate game rules, right? These are very simplified, but if you need to remember them, these are how I summarize debate as a game and all of that complicated words. Next to-do list is to, one, prove the app is bad. Two, decide if the CP is unconditional. You will learn about unconditional and conditional in the next slide. Decide if the CP is unconditional. Decide if the CP is conditional. Answer, what is the status of the counterplan, right? So if you are the neg, you have to do those 4 things to win the round, right? You have to be like, the app sucks. It is bad. Vote neg. 2, you need to decide if it is conditional or unconditional, right? You do not decide both if it is unconditional and conditional. That is contradicting, right? So for the second and third point, I want to clarify that you only pick if it's conditional or unconditional. In the next slide, I'll talk about that strategic value. And fourth, answer what is the status of the counterplan, right? So if anything, if we kind of condense it, it's actually just prove the app is bad and answer what is the status of the counterplan, right? We'll get to the next slide. What the neg does not have to do, which is like why people don't like being the neg, or like if you're a novice JV, it's like, oh my God, I don't want to be the neg because it's so hard. And it's like, we're like agreeing with the app and counterplans. That's not how it works. But this is why we have lectures, right? The neg does not have to stick with their CP till the end of the debate. So people think, or especially when I was a novice and when I teach novice and JV folks, why would I run a counterplan? Why would I run a critique? It just seems like I'm agreeing with the affirmative, and in debate, don't you have to disagree with the affirmative? Don't you have to say that everything the affirmative says is wrong or bad, right? That is how people think about debate generally, right? But what makes policy debate so academically rigorous, so complex, but also really fun, right, is that these debate rules or games that could be confusing when you first come in, when you start to learn their purpose, it makes a lot more sense. So like, I really hope in the Q&A, if you have any of those questions, I had to ask these questions that I'm explaining right now to people who were older than me that have been in debate longer. And I only found out this information through talking to people who are older than me, more experienced than me, volunteered at these camps, right? Because that's how I learned, right? I had to get over my fear of like, I might be wrong, because I'm more impressed with people and students and adults who ask questions, because that shows growth mindset and they're open to learning rather than closing off conversation because they are afraid of being wrong. So that's what I value. Y'all could have different values, but that's how I teach. Next, what is the status of a counterplan? Conditional and unconditional, right? So this is the same term if you've heard a varsity debater say, oh, are you condo or uncondo, right? They have like these little terms, and it's really fun and cool. But if you are not using debate jargon to help another person learn more, but you're using it instead to wield power or make them kind of like feel not that nice because they don't know something, I don't think it's very helpful. So that's not how I teach. So we'll go over condo and uncondo. So unconditional. So I'll read my notes. So this will not be on the PowerPoint, but this will be in the notes section. So if you want to follow along, I'll be reading this in the presentation that is linked in the folder of all the lectures. So because the neg's only job is to prove that the plan is bad, the neg doesn't have to stick with their counterplan until the end of the debate. So conditions under which the neg can decide not to extend the counterplan in a 2NC or 1NR or 2NR are what we call the status of the counterplan. So if someone asks, what's the status of the counterplan? These are some of the possible responses to that question, right? So if you would like to write this down or like read along, I'm just reading this off of the notes from this PowerPoint. So unconditional, the neg is stuck with the counterplan. There is no condition under which the negative will stop advocating the counterplan. In other words, the counterplan will be in the 2NR and the negative is no longer able to advocate for the status quo. If you only make the counterplan conditional, if you basically had no other way to win the debate. If that is, if all of your arguments rely on the counterplan in some form or another, then why make things complicated? The app should never, ever complain about the fact that the counterplan is unconditional. So I will say that. If you're the affirmative, right, you are presenting a plan. You're like, here's a plan, please pass it, right? If you're the negative, you're like, your plan sucks. Here's all the reasons why it sucks, which is like the counterplan, the K, the disadd. These are all the independent reasons why it sucks, right? If the negative, instead of being like, these are all the reasons why it sucks, which one are you going to go for? Which reason that you're going to go for that why my plan sucks? I don't know. It's unconditional because, oh, sorry. I don't know. It's conditional because I don't know what I'm going for, right? If you're the affirmative, it's harder because you have to prepare for the K, you have to prepare for the counterplan, you have to prepare for the disadd, right? These are all conditional arguments that the neg is like, well, I'm not going to tell you what I'm going for because I'm going to trick you. I'm going to put more emphasis on the K than the counterplan, right? That's like debate strategy. When the negative team says the critique is unconditional, the counterplan is unconditional, this argument is unconditional. What that means, what that is saying, right? What that's saying is that you know that the negative team will be going for that argument, right? So if the negative team is like going for that argument, like you can focus all of your time just attacking that because you're just trying to sell your plan to the judge, right? So yeah, so that is really what unconditional means. It means that the negative team is not going for the other off cases, right? It just means that they will go for that. So when you are conditional, the neg can kick out of the counterplan at any time, right? There are no conditions under which the negative must commit to the counterplan. In other words, the counterplan may or may not be in the 2NC, 1NR, or the 2NR. And even if the counterplan is extended in the 2NR, the judge is always free to opt out of the status quo if the AF proves that the plan is more desirable than the counterplan. This is pretty annoying for the AF to deal with since they don't know what to expect and how to allocate their time, but it's like that sometimes. The AF will often complain that conditionality is unfair and uneducational, and depending on the way that is debated, many judges find this persuasive, right? For the sake of time, there's dispo or like dispositional arguments that the notes in this presentation is going over, but I'll go over the last part for clarity. Next, last part, we're almost there, yay! Okay, AF responses to the counterplan, right? AF responses to the counterplan. Spit on it. What should the AF do to answer the permutation, right? We spit on it. This actually came from the commonly used acronym in debate, which is called POST, P-O-S-T. acronym that many lab leaders, many debate camps use, and that I've heard of, but I just didn't learn it that way. And other people who learned this didn't also learn post. So this is what I created. This is not like everybody in debate knows this, right? This is how I created the acronym for me to remember. This spit on it really came from the idea of post, which is like very common debate jargon terminology, which stands for P, permutation, post, O, offense, S, solvency, and T, theory, right? I didn't learn answering counterplans that way, so I asked for help explaining it. So shout out to Dr. Joe Lemieux from CSUN for help on this, and for Cameron Ward for references. He said that he didn't know post either way, so we came up with a new acronym. So I appreciate his help on this, because now I remember spit instead of post. I add that part because I want y'all to know that it's okay to ask for help. Your lab leaders, teachers, educators are not all knowing beings, so don't restrict your learning by asking questions, because you may not know, you may think that everybody else knows about it, but they really don't. Post, spit on it. Solvency deficit is explain why the counterplan is unable to solve for one or more of the impacts laid out in the 1AC. For example, if you are reading the abolish the USFG affirmative against the reform EPA counterplan, you might say, the counterplan doesn't solve the politics of SAD because any attempts to reform the agency is doomed to fail because of examples from the Dakota pipeline, Flint, Michigan, shows how incapable our government is for solving our problems, and that's our evidence, right? So that's what a solvency deficit sounds like. Next, permutation. Test whether or not there is really a forced choice between the plan and the counterplan. This is logically similar to saying the counterplan doesn't link to our affirmative. The typical perm is perm do both, right? So if you hear perm do both, that is the P part of spit on it. So one, you should read the DA's link to that counterplan, and two, turn the net benefit. So I inquire. So this was like the creative way that we kind of use spit on it, but I inquire. When we went over condo and uncondo, right? Conditionality, the concept, the argumentative value of conditionality, right? Inquire is an important first question before employing the strategy of conditionality or unconditionality. And this is why inquire is important. You use cross-examination to inquire about the status of a counterplan. If you heard it, a varsity debate, you're like, what's the status of the counterplan? What's the status of the alt? What's the status of the K, right? They are inquiring to determine during prep, okay, is this argument going to be conditional or unconditional? Are we going to kick it? Are we going to go for it, right? So inquiring conditionality is determining whether or not to go for the argument till the very end or to just kick out of it and waste your time, right? So that's why as the affirmative, you should really force the negative to answer, is it conditional or unconditional, right? Because we can get into the Q&A, but there is a reason why some arguments are an AF argument and some arguments are a neg argument. And to understand the function of it, it's because debate has established rules for the game, like how there is always a win or a loss. There's not, I kind of won. When you look at your record, you're not going to be like, oh yeah, I kind of won that round. It's a win or a loss, right? So if you think of decisions, anything like that, win or loss, inquire, is it conditional or unconditional? You as AF get to force the negative to be like condo or uncondo, because if they do not give you a clear answer, oh, we're going to decide. That is unfair. That is breaking the rules of debate of the game, because permutations and conditionality, the negative has to decide if it's unconditional or conditional, because if they don't tell you, they don't tell the AF. They're like, oh, maybe we'll go over it. Maybe we won't. I don't know. You'll see, right? That makes the negative, the AF can argue. That makes the negative a moving target, because they're not making it fair for the AF. They're not really explaining it, blah, blah, blah. There's different ways to argue this, right? So, but basically, if you are the affirmative, and you ask the negative, what is the status of the counterplan? Is it unconditional or conditional? They should answer one of those. If they try to avoid the question, the affirmative, because you inquired, you get to make the argument now in the 2AC. You go to the 2AC, okay, we inquired if it's unconditional or unconditional. They didn't answer that. So it's unfair for the AF because of the time burden, blah, 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 blah. We can discuss this in lab, right? But inquire is very important. If there's anything that you remember from spit on it, please remember to inquire about the conditional, whether or not an argument is conditional or unconditional, right? when you determine that it really changes the trajectory of the round, because you now know what the other team is probably going to be doing in their next speech. Next, theory, almost done, y'all. Theory, procedural objections to the counterplan. Yeah, that is, these arguments do not take a stance of the subject of the CP, i.e., does the CP solve? Is there a net benefit that outweighs the solvency deficit? Instead, they claim that the neg didn't follow the proper procedure, and therefore the substance of their arguments cannot be considered. You can always identify theory arguments because they will be impacted in terms of fairness or education. Examples of theory arguments could include conditionality is bad or agent counterplans are bad, right? So if you think of spit on it, just app argument. If you spit on it and you're the neg, do not spit on it, right? Only spit on it if you're the app. Yeah, so what I just talked about like conditionality is unfair because of debate rules, right? That is theory. So when you're talking about the rules of the game, if the app is like, oh no, or like the neg is like, oh no, rules of the game broken, then that is theory. That is what like theory essentially is. Next, that is the end of the slideshow. I will ask my sister for help so I can see all of your faces on Zoom. But I know that I took some time for attack time, and I know that 2 p.m. is class time. So I will just be on call and just like not take a break because I know that I was getting late started. So if y'all would like to break off into lab or my lab, just stay here. I will be opening the floor to more questions. But these are just the last things I want to leave y'all with. I highly recommend reading non-debate books for debate development, right? So these are all examples of just how I use teaching. So a lot of my teaching tools aren't even here, but how I view teaching, how I put presentations. I really had insight on how to view things I didn't understand from reading these types of books. So the reason I put it here is because I think it would be helpful if you are a new debater, whatever debater. These are interesting to me. I read them for personal and debate development. If you would like suggestions, feel free to pick a book, any book. I read all of them. They really help me with non-debate stuff and just professional development, personal development, all those things. So if you're like me and you like to do that, then take a screenshot or just like pick one and then email me. I would love to talk about it and jot down ideas. So thanks for your time and lecture. I will open the floor to more Q&A. Actually, I do need a quick break. I have been lecturing for 41 minutes. Y'all have a timer. So if you know how long it's been, some debate habits, just stick with me, right? So I will be back at 2:05. I'll put that in the chat. I'm going to turn on my video, but the Q&A will start at 2:05. If you are not in my lab in your JV, feel free to take your students and go to lab. But if they would like to stay, I will conduct the Q&A during that time. So I appreciate your understanding and your patience. I will be back at 2:05. We will start the Q&A then. Thank you. I do not see everybody yet, but I will be back at 2:05 when I can see everybody because I want to see my screen.